Hello, hello. Welcome to our Job to STEM podcast. I'm also pumped to introduce you to Elisha Johnston, a researcher in molecular biology. He's been involved in a vast array of research projects ranging from craniofacial development through chromatin conformation to cartilage regeneration. He's currently doing research at UCLA, analyzing important pathways in osteoarthritis, computationally, and also in a wet lab. He volunteers at the West Los Angeles CalVet Senior Living Home and Arthritis Foundation LA. Elisha is also part of the ISEF gang, y'all. He is an SDS scholar, and above having scored science fair awards, he's a recognized speaker and had already published 8 scientific papers. I believe we've got a lot of interesting topics to cover today on the pod. So, hi, Elisha. Welcome on board.
Thank you. Really excited to be here.
You might know how the drill goes. The first question is going to focus on your history, your past with research. So, how did you get into the scientific world and what's your STEM story?
Yeah, so I guess it really all started when I was in sixth grade. My very first experience with science fair was kind of just I went to a school which didn't focus on science too much and wanted to see more of what science looks like in real life. I think I found out through some friends about the science fair, and I was like, you know what, I'll check it out. So, checked it out. Ended up doing a pretty, just a very, very basic project for my first time. But I had an amazing experience at the science fair, and what was really cool is I was able to see some of these, like there were some ISEF level projects at the science fair that I was at. Just seeing those people, seeing like how much impact those types of people can have on society, that really just inspired me to keep going. And then really that led to the next year me doing another actual research project using like cells in vitro culture kind of thing. And then that really just propelled me to keep doing like in vitro high impact kind of research. So yeah.
So, if I'm counting well, you've been in the world of research for over or almost a decade now, counting from the.
Close to that. Yeah, I would say like 7 years or something like that. Yeah.
Wow, okay, that's an important anniversary. You should celebrate it somehow.
Yes.
And I've also mentioned in the beginning that you've been involved in a lot of research projects. Could you expand on these works?
Yeah, so I think as I said, the first research project I did was very basic, and it was just something I did at my house. It was really something where I wanted to see what's like some different protein quality. Pretty much like I took chicken and I wanted to see if organic or conventional chicken was pretty much healthier. So did this like little assay, and that was able to help me see which one has more protein quality. Once I got through that one, and I had some experience, mainly with a lot of the research writing process and things like that, writing papers, creating a poster, stuff like that, I was able to start doing some more research projects with like actual cell culture. So that involved looking at something called proliferative therapy for arthritis. So that really led to all of the science fair projects that I ended up doing after that point. So literally from the point of seventh grade all the way through like junior year of high school, I was doing projects on something related to osteoarthritis, specifically in vitro. Those are the ones that I did for science fair, and then on the side, I was also able to do a couple projects for various conferences. There's also another science competition where I did a computational study, and this is mainly looking at different interactions between different proteins within osteoarthritis to better characterize the disease. And finally, I was also able to get involved once I got to UCLA actually in 2 research projects. There was one with a professor who works in public health, and another one was with a professor who is actually studying osteoarthritis using orthopedics. So for the public health one, we were able to start doing some research on glare, like when someone has like vision issues, right? They'll have glare, and they can't really see clearly. So doing some research into that, and specifically within that, looking at the questionnaires that we provide them when we do the assessment so we can better assess their condition. So it's more like a patient reported outcomes kind of study. And with my projects at the current research lab, um, the name is Dr. Karen Lyons. What I'm doing here is I guess I have a couple different projects that I'm going on here. I have one that's again computational, trying to look at interactions within early stage osteoarthritis to determine kind of the progression of the disease. Beyond that, I'm also doing some in vivo experiments where I'm looking to see how mice are reacting to various forms of like poking and stuff like that after they've gotten surgery, and that'll be able to characterize what the disease is like, given various treatments that we're giving them to hopefully slow the progression of arthritis. Many different types of studies from lots of different time periods, I guess.
Wonderful. And since you mentioned osteoarthritis in different research projects, I'm curious, like, where does your passion for treating this disease or finding biomarkers and such derive from?
It actually has a few different sources. So I guess what really jump started it was my dad had a when he was in high school, he had a basketball injury, and that led to just his left knee just experiencing continuous progression of osteoarthritis over time. He tore like his ACL, and then there was a bunch of other complications with that. And because of that, by the time he was like 40 or so, he was pretty much not able to run, and his mobility was definitely very, very limited. So he got some treatments for it. And I remember even when I was like 12 years old, this is probably when he was like 46 or so, he was experiencing like so much pain that he could barely even walk. So, being a 12-year-old trying to experience like trying to take care of the house because my dad can't do it, stuff like that really impacted me. And then I want to see, more of what I can do to help people like this because obviously I wasn't the only person who was experiencing having a loved one who's had some condition like this. So that really propelled me for the beginning. And once I started getting involved with the Arthritis Foundation and started seeing so many more people that have this disease, and then even beyond that, when I started working at the CalVet senior living home, where I'm working with veterans who, many of these people have spent their entire lives in the military, just nonstop exercise. Like even my stepdad, for example, when he was in the military, he served for probably 35 years or so. He had to wear like 40-pound bags, like during hikes, right? That puts so much stress, especially on your joints, and then that's how you kind of start seeing arthritis. So just really all of those different experiences really wanted me to really, I guess, made me into who I am and really drove me to study this disease even more.
It's beautiful how that personal experience has shaped you into the person you are today and also into the researcher you are at this moment of time. And since you've mentioned how many people are affected by this disease, I know it might sound a little bit weird asking this question, but who is your target audience if you are talking about research? So, who are the people who can benefit from that? So, you mentioned the military, elderly, who could be the beneficiary of your invention?
The largest audience is probably, the elderly, just anyone over really 65 who's done any sort of physical work throughout their lives and haven't been able to maintain their joints too much. That's probably the biggest audience just because, that's just comes with age. But I think definitely some other audiences that are very prominent are definitely athletes because so many athletes, for example, in American football or basketball or soccer, which I know everyone else calls football, um, and sports like that, so many people get so many injuries from like tearing ACLs from just like from different tricks and things like that within sports. You really put a lot of stress on your joints, and that leads to what people usually call post-traumatic osteoarthritis, which is driven from some type of injury. So there's that. There's also military. Military, it's more of something called primary osteoarthritis, which is more of just so much wear on the joints because of just so much continuous exercise that you end up with just really degraded joints by like for example 35 years of service. So
Thank you for the explanation. I think it just really shows how many people could find your invention a blessing. And I would like to get more into the scientific key part, if we can say that, because I've read that you use HD or hypertonic dextrose injections. Could you expand on this type of therapy? And also a little bit tied into this question, like what's the big plan with your research? So what's the best case scenario you can imagine today?
this treatment, hypertonic dextrose, is, I guess, it's been studied a decent amount, and there definitely is some evidence that it does help to regenerate cartilage. We don't know exactly whether that cartilage is able to last, for example, for 5 years, 10 years, just because the joint is it's so complex, and because there's already been so much degradation, it's possible that we can see those gains start to get kind of like degraded over time, at a little bit of a faster rate than a healthy person. But pretty much what this treatment is you apply a small amount of this hypertonic dextrose into a joint, so you inject it, and what is hypothesized will happen is that will draw water away from kind of the local areas, and then because there's not enough water in those areas, it'll start an immune reaction where the immune system will start to repair some of the cartilage that's inside that joint. So that'll be mainly the extracellular matrix, and it'll also, um, this is what people hypothesize at least, that some of the cells within that area will start to proliferate also to start reactivating and producing more of that extracellular matrix. And that's actually what I did research in, because that mechanism hadn't really been known prior to my research. So that was one of the parts that I really helped to uncover, was that mechanism. Let me qualify that actually. Like I didn't discover, I didn't, I would say, completely come up with a mechanism, but I was the first one to show like in vitro evidence of that. So before that, no one had really shown any evidence of how the mechanism worked. It had all been hypothesized. So some of the research that I did was like some of the first to actually give some empirical evidence for that, which I was really glad to be a part of.
And I don't know, have you touched upon your big plan, the best case scenario with your treatment? Because you said that you were the first one to discover this in a wet lab situation. But if we look back into the distant future, where do you imagine yourself? Are you going to be working on this research and expanding it into more, in vivo situations? Or would you like to discover in other areas as well?
Yeah, so thank you for bringing that up again. So I think really with that treatment with hypertonic dextrose, I might get back to it once I'm starting, my own lab, and like once I become a PI myself. But just because I'm in college now and I work in a different lab, that's not something that I've been able to pursue as much now. So ideally, what will come from the research that I'm doing right now is just more understanding of the osteoarthritis progression, because people really don't know a lot about how the disease progresses right now. So with this computational study I'm doing, I really want to make sure that that we're able to understand the different interactions between different proteins, and how those interactions will lead to a further progression. And another part of that is also like the specific cell types within the joint, and seeing how those things will interact with each other with regards to these proteins. So I guess the overall impact with that is this will hopefully provide that first step of understanding the progression. And then because we're able to understand the progression of this disease, we're able to better treat them in the early stages, which is what's typically most important for this disease, because treating at late stage just isn't really realistic because of uh, how complex the degradation process is.
I think that it just really reflects on the fact that how many or how much part of science is still undiscovered. But I'm happy that you
Mhm.
play an essential role in treating and in finding effective solutions for treating this disease. And with that, how do you envision the future of medicine?
That's a really good question. I think that there's a couple different ways that I see this going on. What I really think is would be ideal, and this is what I really hope happens for medicine, is that we start seeing treatments that are very focused on addressing the root issues. I know right now, I don't know if this is internationally also, but I know at least in America, a lot of the treatments that people are using are typically just pain medication instead of actually treating root diseases. And this is definitely, I know for osteoarthritis, this is a very, very major issue with where definitely thousands. I know many people. I wouldn't give an exact percentage of how many, but it's a pretty large percentage of these people with osteoarthritis are just getting pain medications because it's the simplest way, and they might get some type of other treatment in the future. But because of how complex the disease is, that's kind of just what the standard of care is right now. So I really hope that in the future, medicine really does focus on treating the root diseases, and this might involve a lot of regenerative medicine treatments kind of thing. But that's something I'm really not sure about. But that's kind of what I hope for with medicine.
Really changing the perspective or how medicine treats a lot of diseases. And I can also attest to the fact I've been working in the pharmacological industry, and it's really
Mhm.
about treating solely the surface symptoms and how great it would be to create effective preventative measures to slow
Yeah,
down or
exactly.
even prevent totally the disease. So it's really important.
Yeah, that's good. That's pretty much exactly like what I was thinking. So, yeah.
Tied into the big picture kind of questions, what is the greatest challenge our world faces right now, according to you? And if you could have a plan of some sort, how could we overcome it?
Yeah. So I'll talk about this more in like a medical perspective because that's, what I know best. Uh, I don't know like anything about politics or anything like that, so I can't go into that. But I think with regards to medicine, I think the biggest challenge is probably um, I'd actually say it's probably the same thing that I was mentioning is in the field of medicine, making sure that the treatments really are focused on treating the patient as opposed to just masking the pain or I guess really curing the disease because so many of these different diseases that people are experiencing now, people might be able to get some type of treatment, which is amazing, especially for something like HIV, where it is untreatable, and there are able to be treatments that do help to really make sure that they're not people that have the disease that are positive, they won't be able to transmit it, and they're also not experiencing the symptoms. That's really really amazing, but because of there's so many different diseases that are just require like a lifetime of medication. I think really making sure that some type of solution, I guess really future types of solutions do help to treat underlying diseases and hopefully will help these people to get off of medication. I think that's the most important thing. But we'll see if that happens.
Also have the brutal side effects. I don't know about
Mhm.
medications specifically, but what are the most common and most severe cases you've experienced in this field or in terms of osteoarthritis?
The one that's most commonly used is just, basic pain medications such as aspirin. This is non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. And those ones, it'll typically just be, you know, you're taking so much medication, it's going to be bad for your liver, things like that. Once you get into corticosteroids, which are able to kind of mitigate the pain for probably 3 months or so at a time, same thing. You get a lot of you get some liver issues, and then with that, you also get actually increased progression of osteoarthritis. So even though the pain's going to be going away, the actual disease is going to be getting worse, and that's just because when we're treating with something like a corticosteroid, we're eliminating we're eliminating the immune system in the area, and the patient is starting to do more activity. So because we don't have any sort of protection there, and because we're starting to do more activity, it's just going to be overall less healthy in that area. And then once we get into opioids, then we end up with the really major issues with addiction. So that's really what we really want to avoid that, just because when people do get prescribed opioids, especially for long periods of time, they end up getting really addicted. There's so many issues with overdose and things like that here in America. So that's probably the most serious side effect that I would say that comes with osteoarthritis as it is today.
Yes, and creating an effective therapy would prevent all of that kind of ripple effect of the disease becoming more serious and also the treatments and its side effects also exacerbating the condition. Now, into a lighter topic. You've competed on various national and international platforms. We've actually been at ISEF 2019, so I guess
Mhm.
that was one of the major highlight moments in terms of these scientific fairs. But what would you include in your STEM highlights reel?
Yeah, I would definitely say that ISEF 2019 was probably it was definitely the biggest highlight for me. Even though I did end up going to ISEF 2020 because of COVID, it wasn't actually a competition. It was just more of like an online platform where we could kind of sort of meet people, but obviously we couldn't have that same person to person connection kind of thing. So I would definitely say ISEF was my biggest time. There's actually one other one that was really fun for me. It was called BioGenius. It was something specific to, I think that year is specific to America, and that one it was nice because it was a pretty small venue. It was only 14 students from across the nation, And there I was able to meet some really close friends, and I still keep in touch with some of those friends every now and then, which that was I think the really good thing about that was definitely the fact that it was smaller, and the people who did host it, they really wanted to make sure that it felt close, and because of that I was able to, have a really good time with them. They did a lot of games and stuff like that with us, even though it was all online. So that was definitely really fun. And I guess STS also, yeah, Science Talent Search. When I just remember when I got the well, first of all, let me say that that application is insane, right? Like, I remember doing that application. It was my final application was 98 pages long, so I put so much time into that. Like, I remember also doing college apps at the same time, and it was so much work. I was like, is this even gonna be worth it? And because like I thought I had no chance at this thing, right? Because I saw my friends, and I had so many friends that were just, insanely qualified, so much more qualified than I thought I was. But yeah, when I finally got that email saying congratulations, I was like, wow, like I was not expecting this. It was definitely worth it. So that was, I think, that email, and then even just the resources that were available to me after being a Science Talent Search scholar, that was definitely another big highlight. And honestly, I got to give credit to my very first science fair also. When I was in sixth grade, 11 years old, that was when I experienced my first science fair, and that was the time where, even though I didn't have an amazing project, I I was able to give a good presentation, and I think because I was really genuinely interested in the project, I was able to end up getting first place in my division during middle school for my category, I guess. So that really just I won't ever forget that moment where I got called up on stage for first place, and like that was literally the best feeling I'd ever have. Like it was definitely bigger than, winning, like, project of the year at California Science Fair, stuff like that, right? That was definitely the moment where I was just like, "Oh my gosh, this is surreal." So, and that's ultimately what jump started this whole career of science. So,
The
yeah.
first that defining moment.
Yeah, that first one was something else for sure.
That's so great. And it's also so interesting how you expand upon like how you were not really focused on the technicalities, but you're passionate about your research. So you think that's your kind of secret ingredient in getting that first prize at your first science fair. And what's interesting is that in Hungary, when we, analyze people from different countries and we are preparing for international platforms, we always say that Americans are the most passionate bunch, and we see it in a very positive light because when you compare you guys with, I don't know, and no discrimination here, but that's just the norm we've seen or the patterns that people from Asia, where the educational system is very, I believe, reward based, and in America you get an award for participating even, that really translates into how you present your project. So I guess we still have a lot to learn from you guys.
I guess so. I think it was really, I guess even at the international platform, I think that even really played a role. I remember, I mean, she's not American, but I think the girl who won like first place in my category was Australian. And I remember like listening to her presentation, and she was really passionate. And I had some other friends who also got like, really high placement, and I think that was a pretty big part of it. So yeah, what can I say? The I think passion was definitely a really big part of science fair. Definitely, when I remember competing. So yeah.
Yes, absolutely. A good fuel. You've mentioned this before a little bit about your volunteering work. So you volunteered at the Arthritis Foundation LA, and now you're also currently involved in voluntary work, as I mentioned in your intro. But could you share some of your most memorable moments or lessons you've gained during these experiences?
Yeah. I definitely think that the most memorable times for me have definitely been at this senior living home that I've been working at, volunteering at, and I think that's really because some of these veterans have just such insane, mind blowing stories. Like I remember I met one guy. I think he's like at the time when I met him, he was 102, so I think he's like 103 now. But he was actually there at D-Day. He was a scuba diver, like checking if there are mines, like in Normandy, that area. So hearing like that story, hearing these like stories from people who were in my history books, I was like, it's crazy that these people like were literally there and experienced it. One of the guys I visit the most, actually, I see him probably 10 hours a week or something like that. Um, with him actually, he was also serving during World War II. He's 98 years old now, and it's funny because we actually have some common interests. We both did a lot of exercise when we were growing up. I do a lot of like calisthenics kind of thing, try to see what I can do with my body, like in terms of flexibility and just body weight kind of thing. And he was actually able to do like so much of the stuff that I'm able to do now, but way better. When he was even into his 40s, actually, he stayed fit a really long time. But even with him, like hearing his stories of being a being like what they called, I think, in the box on the ship back in like the 1940s, that was something really really cool to hear about. So just hearing these stories from these veterans, and also just really hearing their experiences with osteoarthritis. I think those have probably been the most memorable experiences for me. But I also have to say that working with the Arthritis Foundation, I also met a lot of cool people there, and that's actually where I started meeting, I guess, the first groups of patients who had osteoarthritis. And moving from there to the CalVet Senior Living Home, I was able to expand a lot on some of those things that I've been seeing, but just at such a larger scale. So, yeah.
Amazing. Like a doctor gains experiences from interacting with a vast array of patients, you are essentially doing the same. Like you get a better understanding of the conditions by looking at different cases. And
Mhm.
how incredible is that you can experience history in front of your eyes. I've just been reminded of the Netflix series called Timeless. I don't know if you heard about it, but it's basically where they solve crimes in the past and they travel back each time to a different episode during American history. So you don't even need a time machine. You can just go to the senior home.
Oh wow, yeah. That sounds really interesting actually. Yeah.
A little bit on the publications part because I saw that you didn't only publish on osteoarthritis, but also in COVID 19. And you have several
Hmm.
publications under your belt, I believe eight. And I am curious, like, which has been the most memorable to work on? And also, the question tied into this topic, what tip would you give to someone planning to publish? Because it can be an excruciating process.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot of work, and I know even right now on I'm I guess I'm working on 3 publications actually. One's in review right now. Another is definitely in the early stages. I'm actually still working on giving a conference presentation for that. And then the last one, I think I'm gonna be like 6 authors, something like that on there. But that one's also like kind of early on, in the publication stage, I guess. But I would just say that the one that definitely had the biggest impact on me is probably it's the one published in 2021. It's called Hypertonic Dextrose Stimulates Chondrogenic Cells to Deposit Collagen and Proliferate. That one was just really impactful because I was first author, which always feels good because that was the research that I'd actually done. That was actually the research that I'd done for ISEF 2019 and also I guess ISEF 2020. So combining that process of just writing that paper and then just getting the reviews back was so much work though. So I would say if for people that want to get published, just making sure that you have a really professional quality manuscript when you go into the publication process, and just being ready for the reviews also, I think is something really important because those reviews are definitely pretty tough. So and I would even say for that, right? Like a lot of the reviews, some of them are really simple. They just like change this word kind of thing. But then there are also some that are very like open ended, and responding to a review critique like that takes days. So just being ready for that, that's probably the most difficult part. But even just being able to accept that some journals won't even look at your manuscript. Like this last one that's in review right now. Actually, we sent it to I think probably 2 or 3 journals already, and the first one actually didn't even look at it. The editor was just like, "This doesn't fit. Bye." That type of thing. So just being able to accept that and just continuing on being persistent with that, I think is definitely the biggest thing. So yeah, it's definitely a growth process though, I'd say.
Yeah, a humbling process.
For sure,
Absolutely.
yeah.
And also just trying to see, I believe, the editor's perspective, because I believe when we're writing a research paper we have our own mindset and how we want things to work out and sound, and there comes another person who might be on a completely different side and who tries to nitpick your work. It's definitely hard to face criticism and then that it boils down to actually reaching a common ground. Now into the if question department. The first one is, if you had a mic, a physical mic in
Mhm.
your hands, and you could talk to all the young people today, what would your message be to the youth of today, essentially?
Wow. That's I think the biggest thing that I would definitely say is, well, also this keep in mind that I haven't talked to too many people internationally, so this is more focused to the students that I've met, primarily in America, I guess, just because of who I've met. I would say the biggest thing is don't get too caught up in college admissions. I know that all of my friends, we were all stressing out like crazy, like all of senior year, and even before that, definitely like the years before that, when we were in, I guess even middle school, we were talking about college admissions, and all of high school, it was always like, did I get that one? Did I get a B in class that was really bad? Because you had to get straight A's to like, what I thought at least was you had to get all straight A's to make it to college, right? I remember I got my first semester actually in high school, I got two B's, and I thought that it was game over. I thought there was no way I was gonna make it to, any school. Like, definitely not gonna make it to Harvard, definitely not gonna make it to any of these schools. I thought UCLA was out of the picture, right? Um, but yeah, just really focusing on what you like doing, I would say, during high school, and kinda knowing kinda what you wanna do instead of doing everything for the college admissions, right? Like, I guess I had a couple friends who did a lot of things simply for college admissions, and it ended up not actually working for them because the colleges don't wanna see that. They wanna see that you have drive and you have motivation and you have a sense of direction, you know? And I think really focusing on that and making sure that, you have definitely the basics in place, but you don't spend too much time focusing on just trying to have the perfect application for all of high school and stressing yourself out over something that really just comes down to a high degree of chance and just arbitrary, arbitrarity, I guess, is the right word. Yeah, something like that. So really just focusing on that. So yeah, that's probably the biggest thing I would say is just don't get too concerned about college admissions and your future because you have so much time to figure it out still.
And talking about college applications, you've mentioned drive and motivation. I guess that could channel through most effectively through your essay. So, would you say that writing your essay is the pivotal moment, or do you see it's more of a holistic approach when it comes to reviewing your application?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the school. I know for most of the private schools out here, a lot of it is based off of that holistic approach, and some of the I guess the very selective schools that I applied to that were private, they did look at that, and I think they really did appreciate that I had that holistic approach, that I had that motivation and had a sense of direction going into school. But ultimately, I ended up at UCLA, and just because of how UCLA is set up, that's not actually something that they look at too closely. They definitely look at your essays for sure, but so much of it is just because of just making sure they have the grades and the grades, and then back when the SAT was still a thing, the SAT. I know they made it optional now, but having those things, um, and then for me, like I took a bunch of classes during high school that were at a college, that were at community college, and I think that definitely also helped. Is just making sure that I had, I guess, a good transcript. Probably the biggest thing, but then also definitely to some degree, the essays for sure.
These are all great tips. So I believe anyone listening would benefit from that, especially if they're in the US or if they're an international student and planning to apply to the US, because I know, since I've also applied to the US, that it can be quite a long process. The next questions are, if you were a czar of legislation, what would you change about our society and why? So you don't need to go into
Mm.
politics. It can be anything.
I think the clinical process of creating new treatments, that's something that I think could be changed. Is I think a lot of the drugs that are used, which I totally understand because everything is so experimental, that the process of getting treatments out there is like a 10-year process kind of thing usually. But I think hopefully being able to accelerate that just with a little bit more freedom in terms of those treatments, because so many of these people are, for example, dying from different types of cancer, right? And if we don't get this treatment immediately, they're going to die. So I think hopefully doing something to make sure that that's able to be accelerated, I think is something that I would definitely be happy to. I would definitely care if that could be something I could change. So
Hopefully, that will be written into the presidential plan of the next election.
yeah.
And the next one is, if you could have dinner with anyone living today or from the past, who would you invite and why to your VIP dinner party?
Yeah, I think definitely one person that I really, really respected throughout history is someone named Joseph Lister. If you've heard of like Listerine, that's named after him. He was actually one of the first doctor. I think he was the first doctor actually to really recognize the impact of infection and just being sterile. He was like I think he was the first surgeon to ever wash his hands. And you looked at the death rates after his surgeries, and they were so much lower than these different people. And before he really just started thinking about washing his hands, right? And people used to think it was like something called miasma, which was like dirty air kind of thing, bad air. And he started washing his hands, and people stopped dying. And people were like, "What the heck is this guy doing? That he's doing something different." He's like, "I'm literally just washing my hands." And he got a bunch of flack for it. People were getting mad at him because they're like, "Why are you washing your hands? That's so weird. Like you're such a weird person for that." And he would do it, and it would save people's lives. So just being able to discover that thing and really do something so big for the medical field that was at that time, believe it or not, very controversial. That's something that I really respect about him. And then also just like how he lived his life outside of that, even though he was pretty famous after that in his time because of this major impact that he had on the medical field. um, he stayed humble. He really wanted to make sure that I guess that he still like lived a good life. And I know some of these other celebrity doctors, they end up becoming a little bit inflated, I guess, once they start getting fame. But he was definitely someone that really stuck to his roots and really made sure that the people around him stayed loved, that he lived a good life outside of that. So that's something I really respect about him.
That's so important because it's true that many scientists can get really caught up in their professional work, neglecting the personal aspect of life. And since you've mentioned Lister and how one physical act that is unquestionable today has changed the course of medicine, I wondered, have you heard about Semmelweis? He was a Hungarian medic.
I'm not sure if I have.
He actually discovered the same thing. I don't know simultaneously or when Lister did. I believe in the 19th century, so they must have been very close in time. But he also did the same because
Okay.
doctors, after dissecting dead people, basically went on to help women in their labor with the same unwashed
Oh
hands.
no.
And babies contracted the diseases, they died, and also the mothers lost their lives. And he was the one
Mhm.
who actually made it a rule, I believe, in either Vienna or in Budapest for the doctors to wash their hands before procedures and such. So there is this Hungarian tie.
Wow, I'm really glad he discovered that, but that's crazy to think about that, that doctors were doing those types of practices just because of the day and age that they're living in. So, wow, quite unbelievable, yes.
And the next part is the this or that question game. So are you ready?
Okay, let's do it.
Okay.
Excited.
The first one is an easy one, or not. We'll see. Beach or mountain?
Oh, okay, I was definitely in my beach phase for the last few months, but I think as of like 4 days ago, I'm into my mountain phase now. So I'm gonna say mountains.
So it fluctuates, you would say.
Yeah, it fluctuates, but I bought a mountain bike recently. I spent way too much money on that thing, but because of that, I'm obsessed with the mountains now. So mountains.
All right. It's really interesting. Whenever I ask people from, warmer or Mediterranean climates, they all go for the mountain. So I guess we want what is not readily accessible to us. Some
Yeah.
human psychological drive. And the next one is 100 days in Antarctica or 100 days on the moon.
Oh. Oh man, I would say Antarctica, I think, because it just seems the moon seems a little bit too bland for me, I guess. And Antarctica at least, has some living species on that. So And it also, I kinda like the cold, and I wanna be able to experience something that's that cold, so that seems pretty interesting to me, actually.
Yeah, nature is natural AC. Absolutely.
Mhm.
And yeah, I get it. Like I wouldn't even go to outer space. I would have the fear of not being able to return to Earth.
Really, yeah. I can see that for sure, yeah.
And also, like the food they serve, so bad. I saw videos on that
Oh,
shit.
yeah, the dried space food, I remember they had that, there's, like, a science center, like, a science museum out here, and they used to sell that at the museum, and, like,
Really?
I'm sorry, it's not good. It's not.
Did you try it out?
Huh? Yeah, it's not good. I definitely preferred actual food for sure.
Okay. Yeah. Imagine if they served that at a cafeteria. Just this
Oh, no. That
prank.
would be tough.
And the next one is sweet or spicy?
Spicy, for sure.
Spicy
I
food.
love I love so much spicy Chinese food, and also spicy food from other countries, but the mapo tofu is definitely, like, one of my favorite dishes, so and it also has to be genuine, though, it can't be, like, sweet Americanized mapo tofu, it has to be, like, legit Chinese, like, Sichuan kinda style, which that stuff slaps, that stuff's so good.
真好吃. Yeah.
Exactly. No, no, no.
And the fourth one. No more social media or no more messaging apps.
Oh, man. I would definitely say social media because wait, actually wait, sorry, what do you mean by messaging apps? Like WhatsApp kinda thing?
Fiber or WhatsApp, exactly.
Okay, so I actually, like I don't use any of those apps already. I just use, like, iMessage, I guess. So I guess that one because I don't use messaging apps already. Although I do use WeChat every now and then, but I feel like I have other ways to get in contact with my family in China. So, I'd probably say probably no more messaging apps, but that's just because I, like, never use them.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mhm.
It's so interesting whenever I meet Chinese people, one of their first questions they ask for me is that, "Do you have WeChat?" I was like, "No." And the last one is car or motorbike.
Oh, definitely car.
Mm,
Definitely car. I use my car for so many things. I honestly don't know what I would do if I didn't have a car right now. Because, like, I guess I've actually never ridden a motorcycle, but they do seem really fun. But just because, like, I try to carry my bike when I'm with me, to, like, go mountain biking. So just being able to have that space in the back of my car, where I can just put my bike in there. And then even, like, if I go on, like, a crazy road trip, I have, like, an SUV, so being able to just put the seats back and just being able to sleep in the back, like, that's kind of fun sometimes. So that's something that I don't know if I could give that up for a motorcycle, so, yeah.
it's like part of your being now, your SUV.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's so interesting how we can get so attached to our cars because we live, I believe, a great amount of time in our cars. And I know that in the
Mhm.
US most people use cars to get by because of the distances, so that totally makes sense.
Mhm. Especially in a place like LA where the public transportation is pretty bad here. Not like, New York has pretty good transportation. I know even SF has decent transportation, but LA, like, everyone says that you need a car to survive here, for sure.
The LA survival kit. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And the last question that just really wraps up and encapsulates all the things we've expanded upon during this episode is, what does science mean to you?
It's really represents, I guess, advancement, and then also kinda just persistence because I think so much of science is just persisting throughout what you've done. So many different things that people have worked on, right? For example, like Einstein, when he was doing, like, theory of relativity, that, like, even though he was able to do it in, like he did publish multiple things in that 1 year, his miracle year, like, it was still something that, took lots of time to develop. And, so many different ideas that have been discovered, and also so many things that have been invented, they took so many years to develop, and I think so much of that is just based off of persistence. Without persistence, like, I don't know what science would be like. I can tell from my own experience, like, I don't enjoy writing papers at all, but when it came to, like, writing that paper, I spent, like, probably 700 to 800 hours, like, writing a research paper, you know? And, like, that type of effort, I think really if we don't have that type of effort, I don't even know what science would be without it, so that's probably the biggest thing I would say. And then, yeah, advancement is just, like, so much of this it's so much progression, and it's not like we're just gonna have instant jumps to get to certain places, it's so much about that progression, that is required to get to where we are today, so those are probably the 2 biggest things I would say about.
That's so cool that you mentioned these two because a lot of people can go into science or any other field, but if they do not have grit and determination and just the desire to push through, the results are going to be lacking. So I think it's great that you touched upon that, especially in today's society where we are, you know, a lot of us are conditioned to be dopamine junkies. But when you sit through a task, it's actually been proven that your dopamine fixes will be better or that you do not require such large amounts because you've spent time on that work. So that's great. Thank you for coming on the podcast and sharing all your experiences and messages. So thank you again for joining. It was a blast.
Thank you, it was really exciting for me as well.
Follow the pod on Instagram and Facebook as well. As always, thank you for taking a few moments of science with us and stay tuned for the next episode.